Mr. Governor,
Scott?
a couple of times you mentioned growth paying for itself. Were you hinting at all at a transportation impact fee?
Well, I mean, I guess I was hinting at everything. And when you say growth paying for itself, an impact fee, you have to, it depends upon who you put it on. You put it on starting homes and apartments, it basically hurts housing affordability. So you need to look at these things holistically and see what's your goal. If your goal is to have growth pay for itself, is it antagonistic to affordable housing, which is the other big problem we got. So I think we ought to look at all the ideas and see which ones, kind of stick to the wall. But transportation impact fees, we have those. I think the impact fees that would be new would be for schools. So.
Governor, I have a question about the Empowering Parents grants. You said you intend to make those permanent. What sort of funding are you planning to draw from?
30 million ongoing.
30 million ongoing?
Which is what it is this year.
And where is that revenue bookmarked from? Is that general fund dollars? Is it from something that's already?
It's general fund dollars, whether we take it out of the current ongoing general fund or take it out of the 330 mark for public education. It could, in fact, come out of either one. But our budget, if you look through it, is the 330 plus more money ongoing out of general fund. So, but it's just going to be ongoing general fund. But so are the teacher pay increases.
Thank you.
As is public safety. There's a list of about 4 or 5 points that go into the ongoing K-12 budget. But they're all ongoing and they're all general fund. And of course the 330 is now going to come out of a sales tax bucket that dumps into but its early source is general fund. Yep.
My name's Laura.
Yep.
For the scholarship for graduating high school seniors, is there something that would, in the budget highlights, it said for qualifying ones, but I believe
Yeah. Well, I hate to give as a politician, it depends. But originally, there's enough money there out of the 80 million that it would be in the graduating class the next year. We probably aren't going to have enough applicants, so there'll be all of them. But the goal is to be in-demand careers as determined by the Workforce Development Council. And even prior to the Workforce Development Council, the state board and the institutions have prioritized healthcare, cybersecurity, nuclear energy, and something else as their top priorities. But if you don't have those filled, then it's other areas. But we want these kids to have a job. So the language that I believe is going to be in the bill is this money is going to be available for systems where we know there's jobs, where we'll get placement. We give them the money, they go through, they either get their career technical training, their associate's degree at a community college, or their other degree, and they're going to be employed, because that was kind of the commitment the legislature made when we passed the $80 million in demand in the special session. James?
Governor, as you negotiate, the $120 million of property tax relief, are there any sort of hard and fast lines that you will not cross if it comes to your desk?
I'd have to look at where that line was. Everybody knows my position on tax policies: fair, simple, predictable, and competitive, which is a little different for property taxes. But I've told legislative leadership or had a conversation with them about, it's easy for all the resort communities to get together and agree on something for property taxes for resort, or all the real fast, strictly residential communities. But then you got to take communities where you got commercial, retail, ag, all, because that happens around here and there's nothing nefarious about it. But like-minded people get together and say, here would be a great solution. Well, then all the other legislators said, there's nothing in it for us. Matter of fact, it may hurt our district. So I think putting the 120 million out there early, I know both the House and Senate tax committees are very interested in it. That's a good starting place. They got a number to shoot for, and then they can school facilities, just plain, you could dump the whole 120, yeah, you wouldn't, but you could dump it all into the circuit breaker. But it's going to go into property taxes. That's our proposal. The legislature obviously will make the ultimate decision, but property taxes is so complicated. There's so much delta between, like I said, a fast-growing district, a slow-growing district, a district that's got all kinds of mixed use, a district that's a resort district, and that's why property taxes seems to be the last thing in the session that comes up, and there's nothing particularly nefarious about it. It's just because every taxing district, there's a different, problem with it. I think next year, I'm certain next year the values are going to go down, and that's going to make a difference.
Governor, as the lawmakers are hammering out those details, would you prefer to see them put that 120 into infrastructure and buildings so that local governments don't have to levy as much property taxes in future years?
That would be one of the. I mean, the interim committee on school facilities. That would be one of the places they. And I think there's a pretty strong propensity among a lot of the advocates to have a go for that. But there are districts that don't need any new buildings and have all their bonds paid off. There's other districts where they're just about ready to pass a bond, and that's why it's so complicated. But what I have told them is what we did on public defense, where every single county, we took the public defense burden off of them and we picked it up at the state level. And that was, in essence, property tax relief. I like that model, where everybody gets it, it's not complicated. But I don't see any things that got a $120 million price tag in that area, but that's what tax committees do.
Governor, I wanted to clarify that something you said in your speech. You said this may be our one last shot in the near future to make strategic tax cuts that will sustain balanced budget over time. You said that in the context of the $120 million, but were you talking about further tax cuts?
Well, I think that was not too far after I said, there's kind of clouds on the economy, and that given that, we obviously want to maintain a balanced budget and not have to, heaven forbid, I mean, we wouldn't, as long as I was governor, raise taxes or cut services that are critical, or cut investments that are critical that we get a good internal rate of return on. And that's why I'm just saying that 120 million is a pretty good chunk of dough to go into something that we think will satiate part of the concern about property taxes. But to think that we're going to have a $1.5 billion surplus a year from now would probably be wishful thinking.
So you were referring to one time.
Yeah, I'm just returning that having enough, because we're making ongoing commitments in some of these areas. Actually, we did in the special session of both in-demand and K-12. We made ongoing commitments there. You got to add all that up, forecast it out 5 years and say, are we going to be okay? And the legislature will pass some bills that cost us some money, maybe some that generate a little money, but you got to look at all of it. We just started doing 5-year forecasts 2 years ago, Emily, something like that. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago when we started doing 5-year forecasts. James.
Did you just say that you wouldn't, as long as you were governor, ever raise taxes? There's no scenario in which you would ever raise income taxes?
Never say never, never say always, but the chances of it happening is very, very rare. I just can't. That's why we're doing what we're doing. That's why we're taking care of maintenance. That's why we're making sure a rainy day flow. And that is all a great insurance policy to ever have to raise taxes. Now, is there somebody that's basically skating on their taxes and everybody else is paying more? I'd like to see everybody else pay less than that. But to say never, I never say never. But I mean, people know me that know that there's a very, very, very very, very, very low likelihood that's going to happen.
How many berries?
Very, very, very.
You talked a lot about public education funding. While you were standing there talking about public education, were you feeling the darts of the eyes of?
I just felt love.
You did.
That's all I felt was love.
Were you sending a strong message to the education savings account folks?
No, I was, you know, I mean, we talked about the Constitution. We talked about the vote that we had on the, you know, the 80% vote. We talked about all those things, and you know, and then I talked about where we were in choice in Idaho. You know, most people really aren't aware of all the options and frankly how we're ranked. A lot of the states that are doing things don't have even a fraction of the choice we do here in Idaho. And so I thought, and you know, I've supported every one of those, I believe I've supported every one of those choice bills. And I will continue to do that. But my position has always been, I don't want to do anything that's significantly going to be diminutive to the future needs of public education. Look.
Then, Governor, in your world, would expanding the Empowering Parents Grant to be a permanent program, would that qualify as a school choice?
Oh, that's part of it, yeah.
Would that come as an education savings bill in your book?
Well, no, it's not education savings. It's just a straight transfer out of the general fund to help. But it does have parameters around it. That was part of the reason we had a little problem in the rollout of it, because it was in so much demand. And in fact, I don't know if that's been released yet or not. Well, here he comes. He's the guy that told me about it. I'm going to throw you under the bus, Alex, just as you walk in the door. But when we originally did the Empowering Parent Grants, we had a lot of applications that were, and part of the reason they were held up is they didn't comport with any of the intent there, and some of them were from out of state.
Hey, Governor, along those lines with education, do you think Idaho can do both, can do public education and education savings accounts or some form of?
Well, it depends. You know, you gotta look at it. You've got to look at it. I wouldn't say no without looking at it, but the way it's been proposed in some other states, particularly with a trajectory on it, starts off at a little bit. Well, and of course, and I'm sympathetic to where it starts off. For the most needy. But I've been to charter schools in other states. Charter schools in other states look nothing like they do in Idaho. Charter schools in other states are in real urban, really challenged communities. And so when I hear about choice and charter schools in other states, you got to fly up to 30,000 foot and compare what we have in Idaho to what we have in those other states. Because I've been to those charter schools in Maryland, in Tennessee, in New York, and they're vastly different from our charter schools here. They are basically helping kids that are from pretty challenged urban areas, and there's a facilitator that runs it because their public schools have been a failure. I don't want to give up on any of our public schools. I would rather, what they've done is they've let their public school system collapse, and then they've had to bring choice in. We're going the other way. Our public schools are getting better, even though kids are having more complications. So that they just look way different in most states than they do here. You're looking at your watch, Emily. Okay, Logan.
If lawmakers get the itch again this year, would you be in favor of a back-to-back-to-back-to-back direct rebate check on income taxes?
Well, it depends upon the amount. Any amount would be, then it might jeopardize part of that $120 million for property taxes. Most of them say property taxes are number one priority. And that's why we put that kind of those sideboards around the $120 million. But I would never say never. I'd love to do all of it, but our revenue stream is going to have to pick up from what it is right now.
So property taxes, number one above.
That's I have to today, at 10 minutes ago, we released our budget, and that's what's in there from our budget. Is that right, Alex? Okay, thank you very much.